I'd like to read from the this is simply a choice of something from the Nag Hammadi documents. They were discovered in Egypt in the 40s and immediately labeled the Gnostic Library. And I want to talk about Gnosticism today and how we're wondering about that as a category. What I want to read is simply something that leaps out for feminists. And it's the introduction or the first kind of page of the document, The Thunder Perfect Mind. I was sent forth from the power, and I have come to those who reflect upon me. And I have been found among those who seek after me. Look upon me, you who reflect upon me, and you hearers hear me. You who are waiting for me, take me to yourselves, and do not banish me from your sight, and do not make your voice hate me, nor your hearing. Do not be ignorant of me anywhere or any time. Be on your guard. Do not be ignorant of me. For I am the first and the last. I am the honored one and the scorned one. I am the whore and the holy one. I am the wife and the virgin. I am the mother and the daughter. I am the members of my mother. I am the barren one, and many are her sons. I am she whose wedding is great, and I have not taken a husband. I am the midwife, and she who does not bear. I am the solace of my labor pains. I am the bride and the bridegroom, and it is my husband who begot me. I am the mother of my father and the sister of my husband, and he is my offspring. I am the slave of him who prepared me. I am the ruler of my offspring, and he is the one who begot me before the time on a birthday. And he is my offspring in due time, and my power is from him, etc. This goes on with that, announcement in the mystery format of the I am from a divine being. So when this treasure trove of documents came to us in Coptic, people kind of grabbed on to what is going on in these texts. So I want to introduce sort of why I ended up speaking on this topic today of heresies and who says. When Jacques called me, I was still in the midst of the campaign for Senate District 29. I, not surprisingly, did not win, but we did not lose. And I want to take this opportunity also just to thank so many of you who supported in so many ways and let you know that the local newspaper described it as a formidable grassroots campaign. So a couple hundred people, I count up, were involved in some way. So many gains, but unfortunately I'm not the one sitting in the State House in January. But let's see, would I be appropriately dressed? Anyway, I'll stop. So I was kind of groping around, what can I do? Well, I was also scheduled to attend the Jesus Seminar meeting that was held in conjunction with the Society of Biblical Literature and American Academy of Religion in San Diego. 10,000. The Jesus Seminar meeting as a little group in amid 10,000 religion scholars. It is one big nerd fest, so we love it. But I thought, since some of you are interested in the Jesus Seminar, I'd simply give a report on what we're about in that meeting. And do I need to explain the Jesus Seminar? Okay. The Jesus Seminar began 40 years ago as a project of scholars to work on what were the authentic sayings of Jesus, or what can be most probably attributed to Jesus. And it's gone on with other projects since then. We've published, a document which gives the 5 Gospels and has red and pink and black, gray and black as far as the probability of the sayings, and then moved on to the Acts of Jesus, and then working on the Acts of the Apostles, which is the book in the New Testament, what it means to redate that as it needs to be to the 2nd century, and etc. So now we're working on something called the Christianity Seminar, and its purpose is to reimagine and redescribe Christianity based on the research of the last 100 years, and not describe it as the New Testament being a historical document that describes the history of what happened, but rather a rhetorical document and looking back and figuring out what was actually happening. So there's many parts of this picture. One certainly is the people who are hidden from history, the women, the slaves, the people who didn't have their voices heard, and seeing the Roman Empire as the major fact of life in the history of early Christianity instead of the Christians versus Jews. Christianity separating from Judaism was how I learned it in Sunday school, but seeing the Roman Empire as the major issue, not Judaism. Now, the issue addressed at our San Diego meeting was, what is Gnosticism? And I have, in place of a PowerPoint, we're glad we don't have a PowerPoint, some of us. But because I know that this is not necessarily a household word for many of you, I thought I'd GN, Gnosticism. Gnosticism as a category is something that we need to look at and realize that there really was no such thing, which is a product of the last 20 years of scholarship. Gnosticism, as I used to define it in my New Testament classes, is usually described as a doctrine of matter being evil, and the body being evil, and the spirit being good, and descriptions, various mythic descriptions of the world being created by something called the demiurge, which is not an archon, not God. God didn't create the world, but the world was created by this lesser being, and therefore that's why it's not so good. It's not as good as it should be. What's good is pure spirit. And the task of salvation is for the divine spark within each of us to be able to finally escape this evil fleshly body and ascend into the nous, the divine mind, and be at peace in the divine mind. And it also is characterized by gnosis, which means knowledge, as esoteric and elitist and manipulative leaders and all the rest of this. That's how it's generally described, and you'll see that in New Testament textbooks and so forth. But why, though, would Gnosticism be so important for this project of the Christianity Seminar? In the first place, it's because we have these things called the Nag Hammadi documents, and somebody asked earlier what these are. I don't know if you can see this. Is the Nag Hammadi Library, in clay jars in Egypt, in the desert, in the 1940s. It's a long and involved and wonderful story, and a long, involved and wonderful political history of how we actually end up with these available. involving UNESCO and all sorts of things. But these documents were discovered in Coptic and preserved from the early centuries of the Christian era, and they were immediately identified as Gnostic because we actually have documents that correspond to documents that are mentioned by the Christian polemicists. And, they were recognizable. So they began to be interpreted with that assumption about what is Gnosticism that I just described. So there are other texts. So these texts are foundational for the early project of the Jesus Seminar, which incorporated the sayings of Jesus from these documents and looked at sayings of Jesus from Gospel of Thomas as one of the documents in this library. But the other reason that we need to look at Gnosticism is this problem of this recognition of the category itself as a problem. Gnosticism was essential in the definition of normative Christianity. Heresy was essential in the definition of normative Christianity or orthodoxy. Do I need one of those? Just in case, You're not taking notes, I hope. So we said when these were discovered, here's the text of the Gnostics, and they were interpreted and brought to the non-scholarly audience under the label. Elaine Pagels wrote. She did a wonderful job of bringing what's in here, which I read a pretty comprehensible part of the Thunder Perfect Mind, but there's stuff in here that is really heavy weighting. And there's other just very long involved myths, and we've got our version of the creation story and another version of the creation story with all these beings and archons and who's good and who's bad and all of that. And Elaine Pagels did a wonderful job of bringing that to a non-scholarly audience under the title, The Gnostic Gospels. So we have this label, Gnostic Gospels. And my edition even says, the definitive new translation. That would be James Robinson's kind of attitude. Anyway, the definitive new translation of the Gnostic Scriptures, complete in one volume. So these are the Gnostic Scriptures now. No, we're really re-examining this. And Michael Williams is one of the main people who's brought some thought forward, who argues for dismantling this as a dubious category. And his work, and I'm not going to review all of it, but when you actually read the documents and you look at what's a Gnostic from the little one-page encyclopedia definition that we're accustomed to using in our lectures and New Testament courses, I'm not in particularly good shape, if anybody's. But when you read the documents, they don't really correspond exactly to the picture of Gnosticism. There is no Redeemer myth in these documents. There is no, a lot of the things that are described aren't here, or they aren't here in all of them. And if you read each document and then you assume that they're part of this whole Gnostic worldview, you read the document differently than if you say, okay, what's this about? So what we're trying to get to is, what's this about? But Karen King, Michael and Karen were both at this meeting, and it was a good exchange. Karen King takes another part of the issue and talks about how the story of the creation of this category in modern scholarship, and how modern scholars, starting in 1669, if we call that modern, that's the first use of the term Gnosticism. And it's used as a smear against Catholics for being part of Gnosticism. But the, excuse me, the modern scholars were appropriating the Christian polemicists' view of Gnosticism, or view of a bunch of people, and basically using their lumping together of a whole bunch of people into a category called Gnostics as one of the heresies, and then applying it as if it's a scholarly term, and all of a sudden we have a thing called Gnosticism, and we're imagining it that it existed back in the 1st, 2nd, 3rd century, which it didn't. Now, the early Christian writers against heresy, one of them in particular is Irenaeus. I want to actually just talk a minute about what the usual view of the unfolding of history is, and I'll just move to the other mic. Now, I used to do this in Christology classes. I used to teach classes in Christology, gosh, goodness sakes. And the usual view of the unfolding of the first few centuries of Christianity was that the Orthodox, good, true Christians walked a central path, and they worked out doctrine in each generation between radical monotheism, I guess we'll put it to my right and left. You know, there's some correspondence, but radical monotheism on the one hand, and polytheism, tendencies towards polytheism on the other, or Judaism and paganism standing behind, way outside the boundaries of who we are, but we're defining ourselves in terms of Judaism and paganism, and then the monadism, and then we have the Gnostics are over here moving towards polytheism. So we good and true people of the Holy Catholic Church hold on to the original true message and walk and defend it on either side from all of the heretics. And Woody shared a great story about the Pope and a Unitarian leader. You got to tell us.
I read recently that I think it was Dana Greeley, and after the Selma Martin Luther King episodes, essentially went to Rome visiting and had an audience with Pope Pius XII or something, one of those big Roman numbers. And he was invited in to see the Pope. His entourage was not. And he came out of the meeting with a big smile on his face, and one of his assistants asked him, "Well, how did the meeting go?" "Well, it went great." And he continued smiling. He says, "The Pope says that we Unitarians have taken every Catholic heresy and made a religion out of them."
So yeah, all of these other things, I think that's great. I think it's great. The other thing that happens, though, and it is what happens actually with this view of history, it doesn't get substantially undercut or reinterpreted, because this is the view of the prevailing winners. This is what happened, is we walked the middle way through heresy to the left and heresy to the right, and we're the true middle, preserving the original truth, which is always important. But then there were also other scholars of the spiritualist and theosophist bent who grasped on to Gnosticism as something to uphold because of identifying with the margins. And that's what's happening with these texts emerging, too. I mean, there's kind of an unleashing of who was in the margins. Okay, they were the good people, and they were rolled over by the steamroller of this middle way, or the powerful, who were defending the authority of the bishops and male authority and all of the rest of that came with this middle way. And they were the good people. Well, neither of these pictures is really accurate. So what we're struggling with as the Christianity seminar at the moment is how do you what's the other model? How do we look at this? It's a plurality, and it's a whole bunch of different things, but any one of those groups who didn't win were also defining themselves over against other groups. And orthodoxy is not something that was preserved, it's something that was invented in order to uphold authority. And it was invented as the church Christianity moved to being the church, and also the church moved to displacing the empire, the Roman Empire. It was the only game in town when things started to fall apart, and it could establish unity in what was the Roman Empire. So how do we go back and retrace and start to read these texts as texts? And how do we go back and say, well, there are things that are Gnostic that fit that description of Gnosticism. It wasn't invented whole cloth, but Irenaeus, who described it, has given us the way to interpret these texts, and we need to kind of remove his interpretations, and Tertullian and others, of things as heresy and the way he defined them, and start to read them as they are and try to figure out who these people were. We have only the evidence of these texts. We don't really know who they were, whether these were philosophical schools. There may be a clue to that in the word itself, heresy. Jock sent me a meme about this on Facebook. Heresy originally meant schools of thought. And then Christian polemicists defined heresies pejoratively as lesser than Christianity, than true Christianity, kind of diminished it, and then with Gnosticism and other things, Gnosticism, Irenaeus lumps together a whole bunch of things. He goes through Valentinius, and he actually does describe different people's thoughts and different people's doctrines, different teachers, but then they all have a common origin. And the origin, of course, is the devil, right? That's, the origin of all these things that we're defending ourselves against is the devil. Does this sound familiar? I find it interesting also for our currently what's out there, to notice how important the defense of the Creator God is for those Orthodox Christians. They're defending God. And I kind of wonder when we get, what is happening here? But how do we come up with a different picture? It's still a struggle. But we're currently looking at, there was this array of people, all of whom would have looked like they were part of Christianity, and would have assumed they were part of Christianity, and different arguments began when there were kind of revelations and people began to share writings and other people didn't like them, and authority was challenged, I mean, the challenge to the authority of the bishops was challenged and needed to be defended. But then, if the other groups had gained ascendancy, many of them also had leaders who were like bishops, who would be defending their authority too. So it's not like there's good and bad, or they're not good and evil here. The other thing about this, let me just so the other issues of concern, the other main one is unity. And there's this obsession for unity, and the unity that mainstream up the aisle defends is based, as I said, on authority of the bishops, the authority of Scripture as interpreted by the bishops, and it even gets to the point in Tertullian where they argue for just go on faith, you don't need to think. And, that's kind of, if you've seen the movie Agora about Hypatia of Alexandria, it's maybe overdrawn, but you get the picture of them destroying the Jews. I mean, they have those, and kind of, no, let's not think. Let's not think about the heavens. We've got this word in the Scripture. So what do we do with this? If we have no Gnosticism, for scholars, this is an issue because there's like all this work that's been done assuming there's Gnosticism. And we have to kind of go back and look at it again. And the temptation is, of course, to just come up with another word for Gnosticism. But redescribing early Christianity means we need to reconsider labels and how we label. And that's where we go back to that notion of the Tao, that where do we find the unity? I think I'm glad that we're part of a fellowship that can include all the heresies. I mean, the Pope said so, right? We can include all the heresies and all schools of thought and base the unity on something else. And we always have this problem that we're always trying to go back to the kernel, but Jesus' teachings about love aren't substantially different from other people's awareness of love as the foundation of unity. I chose the last hymn because it does this reversal of that middle path that ends up, somewhere out the door there in Constantinian Christianity and the empire, and all of a sudden the cross has become a sword, and all of a sudden Jesus has become an emperor and a military leader. Jacques pointed out this is to the tune of Onward Christian Soldiers. And it's a re-envisioning of onward Christian soldiers in a way that isn't fighting the enemies to the right and the left, but saying we're all going forward, we're all coming together.